सर नमस्कार सर.
नमस्कार सर. नमस्कार. पुण्याचं खूप चांगलं झालं सर सेशन. जवळजवळ 1500 लोक होते.
अरे वा. पुण्याचं किती वाजता सुरू झालं सर?
पुण्याचं आपण 10ला बरोबर सुरू केलं.
अरे वा.
12:30 पाऊण पर्यंत चाललो होतो.
ओके ओके.
इट वॉज अ गुड सेशन.
मॅडमने पण जॉईन केलं आहे.
हो हो, मॅडमने जॉईन केलंय. येस.
हो
मॅडम नमस्कार.
नमस्कार सर.
नमस्कार. नमस्कार. पाबरेकर सर नमस्कार. अनम्यूट करा तुम्हाला. कुठे आहात तुम्ही?
आणि पाबरेकर साहेबांचं एकदा दर्शन पण होऊन जाऊ दे.
मॅडम हे डॉक्टर अजय भामरे आहेत. D.A.V महाविद्यालयाचे प्राचार्य आहेत आणि मुंबई विद्यापीठामध्ये कॉमर्स आणि मॅनेजमेंटचे डीन आहेत. त्यांच्या महाविद्यालयाच्या वतीने आज आपण करतोय.
अच्छा अच्छा.
नमस्कार मॅडम.
नमस्कार नमस्कार.
व्हेरी डायनामिक पर्सन मॅडम.
अरे नाही हो सर.
एवढे थोड्या वेळात सगळं अरेंज करणं म्हणजे
सरांनी मुख्य ओळख सांगितली नाही आहे की चेला आहे त्यांचा.
फक्त भामरेच करू शकतात. जोशी सर.
बोला सर. नमस्कार.
तुम्ही सुरुवात करायची. देन ओव्हर टू पुणे.
शुअर शुअर शुअर. मग तुम्ही थांबा आणि प्रश्नोत्तराला मी परत येईन.
हो चालेल चालेल चालेल.
तुम्हाला तिकडचं सेशन पण करायचं ना सर?
हो हो तिकडलंही करायचं. पण मी जाऊ शकत नाही कारण भामरे सर आहेत ना, त्यामुळे मी सुरुवातीचं बोलल्याशिवाय जाऊ शकत नाही.
मग तिकडचं सुरुवातीचं कोण बोलणार आहे?
तिकडलं सुरुवातीचं मला वाटतं ते कालकरच बोलतील आणि मग मी जॉईन करेन त्यांना. आपण 3ला सुरू केलं साधारण 3:30 पर्यंत त्याला जॉईन करेन. त्याला पण थोडे 5-10 मिनिटं पुढे करायला सांगितलंय आणि आपण वेळेत सुरू करू असं.
इथे किती अपेक्षित किती आहेत पण?
1000.
सर लिंक शेअर करायला सांगू का?
शेअर करा माने सर. शेअर करून टाका लिंक.
ओके ओके.
आणि युट्यूबची पण लिंक शेअर करून टाका.
हो येस येस.
सगळ्यांना वेटिंग रूम मध्ये येऊ देत.
हो चालेल चालेल. ओके ओके.
मॅडम इथे 1000च्या वरती असतील आणि युट्यूब वरती पण कारण रजिस्ट्रेशन खूप झालंय. रजिस्ट्रेशन खूप झालंय. इथे रजिस्ट्रेशन केलं होतं, तिथे केलं नव्हतं. तिथे थोडं सिस्टमॅटिक रजिस्ट्रेशन वगैरे.
पण मग युट्यूब वरती लाईव्हच दाखवतायत का?
लाईव्ह दाखवतो.
ठीक आहे मॅडम. आता ते दिसतंय बघा स्क्रीनवर लाईव्ह युट्यूब म्हणून.
मॅडम नमस्कार. पाबरेकर बोलतोय. अनुराधा मॅडम. पाबरेकर बोलतोय.
हा बोला बोला सर.
सकाळचं सेशन खूप मस्त होतं. मजा आली.
मजा आली.
आम्ही पण खूप शिकलो बरं का.
ऐकून येत सर. एक मिनिट
म्हटलं आम्ही शिकलो.
अच्छा. Why can't I get out of the screen, sir?
काय म्हणता मॅडम?
नाही हा तुमचा ह्याचा स्क्रीन आहे का?
हो हो हो.
हा बॅनर आहे मॅडम. कार्यक्रमाचा बॅनर आहे.
तुम्हाला तेच ऐकून आता कंटाळा येईल सर.
नाही नाही अजिबात नाही.
आज दोनदा परत उद्या एकदा.
मॅडम आमची रिव्हिजन करतो. आम्ही रिव्हिजन करतो.
काय म्हणलात?
आम्ही रिव्हिजन करतो. रिव्हिजन.
पाबरेकर सर तुमचा आवाज खूप लो येतो.
आता कसं?
आता बसले ते फ्लाईट उडवायला बसलेत ते
आता येतो का बरोबर?
एकदम कडक. एकदम कडक. तुमच्यासारखा कडक आवाज.
क्या बात आहे.
पाबरेकर सरांशी फोनवर खूप बोलणं झालं.
हो.
हे तर तुमचं विद्यापीठ आहे त्यामुळे तुम्हाला जास्त
हो आमचं विद्यापीठ
अफिनिटी आहे.
जरूर जरूर नक्की.
पण ही काय लिंक तुम्ही युट्यूब वरची हीच ठेवणार आहात का नंतर वेगळी येणार आहे?
नाही, ते डायरेक्ट युट्यूब वरती टाकले, त्याची वेगळी लिंक आहे मॅडम.
आमच्या कॉलेजच्या नावाने युट्यूब आहे,
हम्म, हम्म.
त्याच्या लिंक वर जाईल ते. मयूर बराबर बोल रहा हूं मैं?
I will request the participants to please put yourselves on mute.
जोशी सर,
हा नमस्कार, बोला.
आबरेकर बोलतोय.
बोला ना सर.
See the total participants in Pune has already joined is about 100, 500 and above. आणि आपल्या इथे आता मुंबईमध्ये 151 आहे. स्पोक टू माने सर जस्ट नाव. तर मला वाटतं तिथे ते बरोबर 3ला चालू करते. तुम्ही तिथे कन्सेप्ट नोट करून इकडे या ना, इथं पण लोक पण येतील तोपर्यंत.
चालेल ना, तरी चालेल, असं करतो.
हा बघा, म्हणजे असं मला वाटतं भामरेशी बोलून घ्या, भामरे सरांशी.
हो हो हो. नाही पण मला
हा.
5 मी लगेच जॉईन करतो ना, मला काय 5-7 मिनिटच लागतील.
कुठे?
पुण्याला.
नाही, पुण्याचं ऑलरेडी 500 लोक झाले जॉईन म्हटलं.
हो मी करतो ना, ते वेळेत चालू करत असतील तर आपण करूया, कारण इथे थोडं वेळ लागेल.
हा, इथे वेळ लागेल. मी माने सरांना म्हटलं थोडा पण लेट इकडे चालू, 5-10 मिनिट लेट हरकत नाही.
ठीक आहे ठीक आहे ठीक आहे, मी तिकडे जॉईन करू येतो.
चालेल सर, चालेल सर.
हा, ओके भामरे सर, अग्री विथ मी.
हो सर, फक्त जोशी सर तुम्ही इथून लिव्ह होऊ नका.
नाही मी इथेच थांबणार.
लिव्ह होणार नाही ते.
ओके ओके, ठीक आहे.
हा.
जोशी सर, ह्याच्यात आता परत प्रश्नांच्या बाबतीत असंच करणार का पुण्यासारखं? प्रश्न कलेक्ट करून
हो आधी तसंच करणार, शेवटी एंडला.
हो, म्हणजे somebody will collate the questions.
हो माने सर.
Sir, Pavreka sir, Shravani Ganguly here. Ma'am, we will be asking everybody to put in the questions in the chat box, and then in sequence as per the most important and pertinent questions, those we will request ma'am to address.
ठीक है. All right.
Yeah.
Somebody read out the questions, so how is it?
Yeah, I'll read it out, ma'am. I'll read it out for you.
Okay, what's your good name?
I'm Shravani Ganguly, sir, remember?
Okay. All right. Yeah.
I would request all the other participants to please mute yourself and put your video on off. Please put your video off. We are waiting for some more participants, so we'll shortly be starting in another 5 to 7 minutes. Request participants to keep their videos off and mic off. We'll be starting in another 5 minutes.
Dr. Mane sir. Dr. Mane.
येस सर.
हॅलो.
हा बोला सर.
हॅलो.
हा बोला सर.
हा जोशी सर जॉईन होतात.
हा ओके, मग आपण एक 2-3 मिनिटात स्टार्ट करू.
हा जोशी सरांना जॉईन करून घ्या, फक्त ते परत जॉईन होतील ना, लॉग इन होतील.
ओके ओके.
माने सर तुमचा आवाज फार लो आहे, जरा आवाज वाढवून घ्या.
तुमचा आवाज येत ना माने सर.
ओके हा हा ठीक आहे, 3 मिनिट वाढवतो.
वाढवा वाढवा.
हा आवाज वाढवा.
राग वाढवू नका.
हा मयूर.
Yes, sir.
हा यू सी दॅट जोशी सर इज जॉइनिंग.
Yes, sir.
हा ते
Honorable Senior Consultant Dr. Pramod Pabrikar, Honorable Chairman of Progressive Education Society Dr. Janani Kote, Dean of the Commerce and Management Faculty Dr.
request participants to please put their videos off.
Hello. Hello, Bhamre sir. Hello.
बोला सर.
Hello.
सर बोला ना सर.
हा, जोशी सर जॉईन झाले, त्यांना अनम्यूट करा. Mayur.
Okay, thank you. So we can start, sir.
Okay. Ganguly madam.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can start the program.
Yes. Good afternoon and Suswagatam. I request you all to rise for the rendering of our national anthem before we commence the day's proceedings.
तव शुभ नामे जागे, तव शुभ आशीष मागे, गाहे तव जय गाथा, जन गण मंगल दायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता, जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे.
Thank you. It gives us great pleasure to welcome you all at this webinar organized by Ramanand Arya D.A.V. College in association with RUSA, Maharashtra. We are honored to have with us on this occasion Principal Dr. Vijay Joshi, Chief Consultant to RUSA, Maharashtra. Dr. Joshi has earned a very good reputation across India as a formidable academician, administrator, communicator, and planner. We welcome you, sir, to chair this webinar and share your valuable thoughts with the participants on the theme of today's deliberations.
Thank you. Thank you very much, madam. Principal of the college and the Dean Faculty of Commerce and Management, a very close friend, Dr. Bhamre. Dr. Mane, who is the Vice Principal of the college, who is coordinating the entire activity. Today's chief guest and the person who is going to deliver this session, Dr. Anuradha Deshmukh. I think she is an expert in evaluation and assessment. She have done several items and resolved these items, edited the item all over the country. Thank you very much, madam, for accepting our invitation to deliver this session. I think because of a conditions today in the pandemic, we are going to take this examination, which is a last year examination, last semester, on the basis of the last semester on MCQ basis. I think we at RUSA thought that this is not only one examination, but then there will be many, many examinations which will come where we will have to include technology and various kind of evaluation processes. And that's why we thought that in order to improve the MCQ, which is a tool to evaluate the breadth of the entire curriculum. So the measurement of a student learning, which is very, very important. We keep on talking about outcome-based learning, but the measurement of outcome, what they have learned, becomes very important. And MCQ becomes a very important tool in order to measure this outcome. We have a feeling And we always feel that MCQ just keep off evaluating the basic recall and a rote learning of the student. In fact, we have this feeling because of us, because we keep on creating MCQs which will only based on the memory of the student. But the MCQ as a tool can also evaluate student on application, on analysis. It can evaluate on the synthesis. All those stages of Bloom's taxonomy, it can evaluate if we develop the MCQ scientifically and if you give time in order to develop this MCQ. So we thought at RUSA that we must have this kind of intervention, though it is very late, but I think it is always better than late. So we thought this kind of intervention will be useful, and an overwhelming response to this particular webinar, where 1,000+ people have registered for this webinar, and already 400+ have joined this webinar. And during this webinar, many more are going to join, talks volume about the requirement of this kind of input for these students, for the teachers who are going to take out the webinar. We at the university have decided that to take the examination on the MCQ basis. People ask question, why RUSA? I think we have to understand RUSA is not only a grant giving agency. The RUSA has a mandate to transform the higher education landscape and have an intervention which will improve the quality of education of the state. And more so, in order to have the quality of evaluation and the assessment, which we keep on interchangeably using. I think we keep on talking about the teaching and learning, but we hardly talk about evaluation, which is a very important part of any educational endeavor, because that ultimately is going to decide, because everybody will ask you, what is your percentage? What is your score? What is your grade? And that depends on this last phase, that is evaluation. And so we have consciously decided that on the base, we have to take this kind of intervention, many more in coming days, so that we can improve the evaluation and assessment process of the entire, how we can make this MCQ reliable, how we can make this MCQ scientific, how you can make these MCQ which are valid, how you can make these MCQs which have a higher order thinking abilities also can be tested. And all this, I think we have an expert who is who's been in this field for quite some time. And we have heard her in the morning when she was delivering in the University of Pune with 1,000+ teachers. I think it was a feast to listen to her with a very crystal clear clarity about what to do and what not to do while devising the MCQs. And I think the second question which people keep on asking, and I think there are people who always think of ulterior motive of anything, which is selfless. And I think this particular intervention is absolutely selfless. We are not here professing any agency to conduct examination. People don't believe that there are selfless individuals in a higher education system which only care for a quality of higher education system. This is a very unfortunate fact. I think all those who have joined right now will definitely have certain inputs. Then people question why at this time, because many of us have already started developing MCQs. Fine, you must have started developing MCQs. But I think we can review the MCQs which are already framed in the light of the interaction which we have with the Anuradha Deshmukh madam. I know many of you are examiners, very experienced people. I know many of my principal colleagues have joined this particular workshop. I know, but even if we keep on doing things again and again, there is always a sounding box we require to find out what is happening new in the area of the evaluation, and especially in MCQ. I always keep on telling this anecdote to everyone. I was having a friend called Vasant Poddar, a very stalwart. He keeps on writing various books. Firasta is one of the great book which he has written. And he was very close friend of Bhimsen Joshi. And whenever Bhimsen Joshi used to sing for a Gandharva festival, this particular of my friend, in the beginning of the session, he used to ask Panditji, which raga you are going to render today? And Panditji used to tell him that this is a time, so I will be doing Ahir Bhairav today. And very helplessly, he used to ask Panditji, whether you know this raga? Just mind well, to Panditji asking a friend whether you know this raga is out of a concern. I think we at RUSA trying to ask you about whether you know how to develop a scientific good MCQs by this interaction is of a similar kind of an attitude and emotion. I know there are senior teachers. I know they are used to develop all these MCQs. But mind well, it was one question in the entire question paper, and all these MCQs were based on 2 or 3 units. Now the entire paper, entire semester is going to be evaluated on the basis of MCQ. So it becomes very important to have a right mix of all those basic recall, application, analysis, synthesis, higher order thinking. So this basic mix of the questions which we want to give to the student. What science says about it? What are the thoughts of the scientists who are working in this particular field? I think we are going to listen from Anuradha Deshmukh madam. So I was the person who was listening to him in the morning. So I am privy to all this discussion which she is going to do with you. And I'm very sure you're going to enjoy this session, and it will going to enrich us. At least it will give a sense of how we can enhance the quality of the MCQ which you are going to give to the student for this last and a final year examination. I am very much thankful to the management of D.A.V, to my very friend and principal colleague, Dr. Bhamre, Dr. Mane, my colleague, Dr. Pramod Pabrekar, who has tirelessly helped in coordinating this entire activity. And of course, Anuradha madam, to sparing her time and giving 2 sessions, 2 hours each in one day, because we don't want to even miss one more day. And I welcome you all, 430 strong participants, to listen to madam, to understand about a very important tool which we are going to use for this last year examination and last semester examination in a very short duration of time. And it is not only for this last year examination. I feel this kind of a capacity building exercise we have been taking and we will be taking, and especially in evaluation and assessment, we'll be doing it much more in coming days. So all those who want to join hands like D.A.V College, we welcome them all for joining hands with RUSA, so that all this kind of selfless interventions, which we'll do for the only and ultimate stakeholder, our students, without any slightest iota of a doubt that this is going to be commercialized in future. I welcome you all again, and again thank principal of this college, vice principal and his entire team, and my colleague, Dr. Pramod Pabrekar, for making this possible. And madam, we are waiting for your presentation. We have seen it in Pune. We want to see it again, because that will give us in-depth sense of a multiple choice question. Thank you very much. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening us on the purpose of this webinar and how it will help the faculty members to implement the new system of evaluation, and how all efforts have been taken by all the authorities to assist the students in going through the whole process without any difficulty. Principal Dr. Ajay Bhamre, in his capacity as the Dean of Commerce and Management at Mumbai University, has been an active participant in the deliberations of the university and the government for past few months. I now invite Principal Dr. Bhamre to enlighten us about the steps taken by the university to protect the interests of the student community. Sir.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. Respected Principal Dr. Vijay Joshi, Chairman of this webinar, and Chief Consultant to RUSA, Maharashtra. Principal Dr. T.A. Shivare, Director Wilson College, Dr. Pramod Pabrekar, and Dr. Anuradha Deshmukh, a renowned academician and today's subject expert. Distinguished principals and faculty members from various colleges across the Maharashtra region. I extend my greetings to you all on behalf of Ramananda Arya D.A.V. College and RUSA, Maharashtra, and warmly welcome each one of you to this webinar. In today's crisis situation, the most affected section of the society is the millions of young students who have neither completed their qualifying examinations nor declared fit to pursue higher studies or employment. The government and the university had together find out a viable risk-free method for completing the evaluation and assessment of these young men and women. All stakeholders have held extensive deliberation during the last few weeks to resolve this problem. With the physical movement restricted as a precaution against the growing pandemic, the online examination seems to be the only option available to both the university and student. The MCQ pattern will not only be useful for the pending examinations of the academic year 2019-20, but it will also be in alignment with the global pattern of assessing the learning outcomes of students. I see this change very positively, and I feel this is going to be our future. Therefore, it is important that we come together to learn the system so that we can give the best to our student. This entire system is quite new to us, but I am proud that we all have accepted the challenge and are marching ahead. The only intention is how we can give excellent and supreme education to our students and also capacity building for our teachers. Today's webinar supported by RUSA is an effort by our college to help the faculty members in moving over to the MCQ system that will introduce convenience, objectivity, and speed in the examination process. We are fortunate to have with us Dr. Anuradha Deshmukh Madam, an experienced academician, as today's keynote speaker to guide all of us on the subject of MCQ preparation. Hearty welcome to you, Madam. I thank RUSA and its chief consultant, Principal Dr. Vijay Joshi and Dr. Pramod Pabrekar for partnering with us in hosting this very useful webinar. We all have once again become learners. Let us enjoy the learning situation and do our best. Thank you. Welcome all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for sharing with us the whole background of the MCQ evaluation process, which has been meticulously planned and communicated by the University of Mumbai to all the stakeholders at such a short notice. The groundwork done by all the participating agencies in this Herculean task will certainly ensure that the students' interests are fully protected. We are indeed honored to have with us today Dr. Anuradha Deshmukh, an expert in modern evaluation techniques, to address us and explain in detail the whole process and tools associated with the MCQ-based evaluation system. With a doctorate in psychology, she has spent 5 years in industry and 30 years in the academic world, out of which she spent 25 years with the Yashwantrao Chavan Maharashtra Open University in various capacities. Most of her time has been spent in designing and implementing a range of training programs for students and faculty. She has handled many significant assignments at the university and government levels. After her retirement, Madam has been focusing on conducting training sessions for faculties both at the state and national level for many educational institutions. On behalf of RUSA, Maharashtra and Ramanand Arya D.A.V College, I cordially welcome you, Madam, to address this august gathering of academicians from different colleges of the University of Mumbai. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay, good afternoon, all of you. And thank you very much for this introduction to today's session and an introduction of me. I think I have to thank my previous speakers, Dr. Joshi in particular, for his very passionate way of putting the need for MCQs and the need for looking beyond just memory-based MCQs. And I have to thank him also especially for the rich words that he used for me. I think your expectations have been built up, and it is now my task, my responsibility to live up to the expectations probably built up in your minds. I must begin with also saying that I have a special affinity for the University of Mumbai because I've done my graduation, my post-graduation, my doctorate, all from the University of Mumbai. So in a way, I'm a product of this university, and therefore this special affinity. Today's topic about writing effective MCQs, I think its importance can hardly be exaggerated, especially in view of the fact that you, very senior faculty teaching across various disciplines, are now saddled with this task of writing MCQs quickly with good quality and assessing students properly. So your task is definitely important. Your task is certainly not easy, yet it is something where you can probably look at it not as a constraint, not just as a challenge, but as a very major opportunity. Today I would talk focusing on MCQs, and I'll just share my presentation with you. Okay. So we are looking at a scientific approach for developing MCQs. As mentioned earlier, today is very important. I don't know whether it is too late or on time or whatever it is, but although you have probably been in this task of writing MCQs, considering that examinations are drawing very close, you probably will have the benefit of going through the MCQs you have designed yourself and probably look at it again, give a second hard look to the MCQs you have already designed. So let us look at it in a more scientific way. Keep all the doubts and misgivings aside for some time. We'll address them as we go along. But let us keep our minds open as pure academicians and look at MCQs as a very useful tool for assessing students. MCQs of today, in fact, today they are the most debated question type. And you have yourselves experienced the reactions of students, the reactions of your fellow staff members, the media and so on, talking about MCQs, whether yes, no, whatever it is. All those things aside, we are not looking at that. It is true that MCQs are the most widely debated question type, yet we must accept the fact that they are also the most extensively used. They have a wide variety of applications in several academic fields, and even all of you are aware that they've been used in the highest level of competitive examinations. Your SAT, your GRE, your TOEFL, all the NEET examinations, your IIT entrance examinations, all of these encompass MCQs. And obviously, they would not have been used by these premier institutions or for such premier examinations if they did not have value. Despite whatever has been said generally about MCQs, it is a fact that they're, as compared to other forms of testing, they are probably a little more popular with the student community. Possibly because of their perceived ease. Perceived meaning perceived by students. Ease because they feel that they are not required to write long answers and then don't have to spend too much time in writing fast and writing legibly and writing well and so on. So in that sense, they are considered generally easy. And to some, they feel that it's just a tic-tac-toe kind of activity that they have to perform. So for various reasons, they are popular among the student community. Whatever be the situation, whether you accept, don't accept, whether you are in favor or not, it must be understood, it must be realized that even today, the MCQ format is one of the strongest predictors of overall academic performance of students as compared to other forms of evaluation. Obviously, they have their merits, they have their demerits, but then there is nothing that doesn't have demerits. So we have to look at the positive features. And in the environment we are faced with today, probably there is no better option for us. Let us look at quickly the advantages of MCQs. For one thing, they allow for testing large groups of students in a short time. You don't have to have long 3-hour examinations. You can test possibly in 1 hour, as has been now decided. So, and you can test the larger numbers. You can cover vast expanse of content. What often happens in the subjective type of questions is you are limited by the number of questions you ask and the time that students have for writing. But here, because you don't have to write out long answers, you can have a large number of questions, you can cover a large number of topics. In fact, you can do justice to the syllabus assigned for a certain course. They require less time to administer, as mentioned earlier. They're quick and easy to score. That's obvious because there's a very definite right answer, wrong answer, and whatever. So you can they can also be scored by machines, manually too. But now with the kinds of facilities that technology offers, it is possible to score them easily. They're highly reliable because of no subjectivity in marking. It does not depend on who is the assessor. It does not depend on who and the mood of the examiner or whether he feels this is right or that is right. It is definitely a very fixed kind of marking system, because of which there is no variation across markers or assessors. And in that sense, there is high reliability. Students are not required to formulate an answer. As mentioned earlier, that's probably one of the reasons why MCQs by and large are considered a popular format from the student's point of view. And now they can focus completely on the content. The responses do not require an explanation. Whatever be your subject discipline, be it something in the languages or the social sciences or the physical sciences, be it management, law, whatever, you still are required to, in the general way, you are required to answer short questions, long questions, essay type, whatever. And that requires explanation, that requires writing skills, that requires language skills, that requires being able to organize things. And all that is not required in the MCQ format. And therefore, the students are not penalized for not having the ability to express themselves verbally. One very important advantage also is the possibility of creation of multiple versions with machine assistance, of course. Within a few minutes, you can dash out several versions of a question paper. Sometimes versions where you have the questions sorted, the sequencing of the questions changed. Sometimes you can have different sets of question papers, but which are parallel in educational, in difficulty level, basically educationally equivalent question papers. Then again, the MCQs permit easy statistical analysis, basically the statistical analysis to reveal how well a question discriminates between those who know the material and those who don't. As one advances using MCQs, one does come across a lot of statistical ways of finding out how well a question has performed in an examination, when used in an examination. And that is the whole concept of item analysis. So how to what extent has a single question performed well in an examination? How well does it discriminate between the well-prepared student and the not so well-prepared student? So in that sense, that possibility is very easy because that statistical analysis is very easy. And of course, this also is possible more because of the technology that is available today. These are generally the major advantages of MCQs. There are, of course, certain limitations which we cannot be blind to. One is that the development of good quality MCQs, items they are referred to, because we talk of item banks rather than question banks when it comes to MCQs. So because MCQs can be in the question format, they can be in a statement format with a fill in the blank towards the end, whatever. So they are referred to as items. But development of such kinds of items is generally a time-consuming matter. It is true that all of you who are now hard-pressed for time and are required to prepare question papers, with are required to submit questions for maybe question banks or whatever, you are required to prepare a large number of MCQs. And that is going to be, as compared to what you're more used to, that is going to be a little time-consuming. But believe me, it is also a very challenging and a very interesting exercise. One disadvantage also is that is claimed is that they tend to be mostly used for testing lower level cognitive abilities. That actually is a criticism more because of the nature of MCQs that appear in examination papers. Not so much a fault of the MCQ per se, because generally what does happen is we do have MCQs testing just maybe memory, just testing recall, pure factual information, which may not require understanding. And that is the large majority of MCQs that occupy space in examination papers. And because of that, what happens is MCQs get blamed as a tool. The fault doesn't lie with the tool, the fault lies with the way the tool has been used by most of us. Measuring the ability to organize and express ideas is not possible. That is something we have to accept, especially when you have to answer at length. You are required to organize your answer well. You are required to have a cohesive kind of answer. You are required to build up an argument. There has to be some kind of logic, some kind of expression of thoughts. That is not possible to be tested through an MCQ because the student is not composing an answer. He's not supplying an answer. He is merely selecting an answer. Then again, lack of possibilities for getting partial credit. This is something that is also a feature that we have to be aware of. If it's a 5 marks question or a 10 marks question, even if the student doesn't answer it very well, he still can get get about 1 or 2 marks for just maybe a few things, a few points that he has rightly written. But in the case of MCQs, partial credit is not available. It's like a dichotomy. Either you get it right or you get it wrong. And therefore, you either get the full marks for a question or you don't get any credit for it. Then again, one criticism that is often lodged, which is not untrue also, is that there is a possibility of a higher level of guessing in MCQs. While it is true that in the subjective type of questions, we as examiners have often come across answers where students have literally written anything that comes to their mind and bluffed their way through also, some of them very intelligently so too. But at least the extent of guessing is not as much as is true with MCQs. But that again is a criticism that we can deal with, Because although there is guessing that is possible, we can reduce the extent of guessing that we allow the students. We can discuss that later. So these are basically the major disadvantages, the major advantages in any system, any kind of testing format, any kind of evaluation tool you use. You will always come across some pros, some cons of that tool. And yet we have to make a judicious choice based on the situation one is confronted with, based on the technology that one has with ourselves, and based on what is something that is the what shall I say, the future. And the future is moving towards a larger number of MCQs. Okay, so these are this is just by way of an introduction to the MCQs. Let us look at the structure of MCQs basically. Let us look at what is the MCQ question type, and can we have certain variations in the basic type. So a simple MCQ, what is its structure like? It consists of a stem. The stem is the part of that MCQ which is not in the options category. It is a statement, an incomplete statement, which probably has a fill in the blank towards the end, or it could be a direct question format. Both are possible, but both of them are called the stem of a question. This stem is followed by numbered or lettered options, maybe marked as 1, 2, 3, 4, or A, B, C, D. Normally, the preferred method of writing them is capital A, B, C, and D as the options. Now, when you talk of an MCQ, you can have two possibilities. One is you could have something like the best answer or the correct answer. For example, if you look at an MCQ with 4 options, where all the 4 options, or rather maybe more than one option can be correct, then that you can look for what is the best answer. So which of the options would be, even if they are all plausible, which of them is the best? And the other option, other alternative is you have only one correct answer, the others are incorrect answers. Whatever be the situation, either the best answer or the correct answer, this is called the key. So if you look at the options, there are 2 aspects to options, one of which is the key, or the keyed response as it is called, and the other options are called distractors. Distractors meaning they distract the students from the right answer. And in order to be effective distractors, they have to effectively distract the student from the right answer. If I repeat, if the student is not well prepared with his subject matter. So this is the structure of the basic simple MCQ. But there are certain variations which let us look at. One is the multiple selection type. Now, in the multiple selection type, you can have statements where more than one statement is correct. And then, if that is the situation, can we try to use a format where we have more than one statement that is correct, but finally the student is required to make a single choice. That is what happens. It's like a 2-tiered question. So at one level, you might have statements marked as I said, small a, b, c, and d. And in the second level, there could be options marked as a, b, c, and d, capital letters, of which the student has to make a choice. And the options could be A, where only small a, that statement is correct. B, both A and D are correct. I'm talking about the statements like this. Then both B and C are correct, and A, B, and C are correct. And you can have multiple combinations like A and D are correct, A and C are correct, A, B, C, D are correct, whatever. But I'm just giving you this as an example. And look, in the light of this kind of illustration, let us look at an example from history. The question is like this. Read the following statements regarding World War II, labeled as A, B, C, and D, and choose the correct option from A, capital B, capital C, and capital D based on them. Now here there are 4 statements. Look at each. The war was fought during the period 39 to 45. Winston Churchill was the British PM when the war was declared. Italy fought against Germany during this war. USA entered the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor. All these statements pertain to World War II. Okay. Now you look at each. What is the student required to do? He is supposed to look, he or she, at each statement. The war was fought during this period, 39 to 45. Yes, correct. Winston Churchill was the British PM when the war was declared. Yes or no? No, because it was Chamberlain who was the British PM when the war was declared. Italy fought against Germany during this war. No, Italy fought along with Germany. So this is incorrect. This is incorrect. USA entered the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Yes, definitely. So you find A and D are correct. And now if you look at the options, is only A correct? No. That is not the fully correct answer. Both A and D are correct is the correct answer. And that is the key. So what have you done? You have slightly increased the complexity of this question. And you have made the student look at each of the statements and decide for himself which of these is right or wrong. This is an example of a multiple selection type of question. Again, a variation of the, finally he's doing using the MCQ format here. He's making just one choice. The ranking type or the reordering type is also one kind of question format, which otherwise can be by itself, but now I'm looking at the ranking type in the context of MCQs. So you could have a set of operations, a set of processes, some chemical compound has to be prepared. What are the constituents, and how do you do it? How do you form a process in a laboratory? How do you what are the steps involved in a certain product or a certain, what are the processes, sub processes involved? If these are given as options in different orders, and you expect the student to choose the correctly ranked order, that is the way the ranking type of question operates. Again, I'm talking of ranking, not just asking the students to rank them, but asking the students to choose the correctly ranked option. Look at this example from chemistry. This, of course, is at a very low level of knowledge, basically the process of distillation of water. And now we are asking the student to identify which of the following represents the correct sequence of steps to be followed in the process of distillation of water. Now, yes, there are major sub-processes like allowing vapor to rise, cooling of vapor, boiling of water in a beaker, collecting vapor in a separate container. Now, all these elements are ordered differently in the different options, and the student has to select which of these is the correct order. What should he do first? What should he do later? So this is a way of testing his understanding of how a certain process operates. Okay, so this is an example of how you use the ranking type of question, ordering or reordering of the questions in the multiple choice question format. I would request whoever, all the audience, whoever, to please refrain from using your whiteboard or whatever it is, because I find that there are some kind of marks that are appearing in the slides. Please do refrain from that.
Ma'am, you can just clear annotation. There's a tab.
Can you not do it at your end?
No, ma'am. Only the person who is sharing the screen can do that.
Okay,
Ma'am, there's a task bar. There's a annotation, a tab known as annotation.
Annotate here.
Yeah, ma'am. You click on that, you will get clear all annotation.
Clear all drawings. Do I click on that?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the example of a ranking type of question. Now let us look at still another format. Again, we are looking at a multiple choice format, which is probably a very good question type. It's called the assertion reason type. What is this? Here you have two different statements. One is an assertion. It is given under the label assertion. One is a reason. They are two separate statements. Okay. Now, you are expecting the student to see the relationship between these two. For example, we are telling the student to choose option A if both the assertion and the reason are true, and the reason is an adequate explanation of the assertion. Does this reason, like molecules move more rapidly when heated, is that a reason for why iron expands when heated? Basically, first of all, is the assertion true? Does iron expand when heated? Yes or no? Secondly, is the reason given? Is it true by itself? Molecules move more rapidly when heated? Yes or no? And if both are true, and if this reason is an explanation for why this happens, then choose A. Choose B if both the assertion and the reason are true, but the reason does not explain this assertion. Choose C if the assertion is a true statement, but the reason is incorrect. And choose D if both the assertion and the reason are false statements. Now see how you have increased the complexity of the question, increased its difficulty level, increased also the level of cognitive ability that the student is using now. He's not just choosing something out of memory. He has to understand the relationship. He has to understand the cause-effect relationship between two events. So this kind of assertion reason type is something I would very strongly encourage you to try to prepare such types of questions in your concerned disciplines. The matching type. The matching type is also a question type that you are used to for very many years. You have two columns and you ask the student to match the columns. But here I'm talking about matching type in the context of an MCQ format. So here you are confronted with two lists, list A and B, and the lists are not equal in length. List A has fewer components, list B has larger number of components. Why are we doing this? To reduce again the element of guessing. For example, if there are 4 components that are to be matched and the student knows only 3, doesn't know the 4th, and you have just 4 on each side, he can choose the 4th by the process of elimination. This is not what we want him to do. He does not have to guess the right answer. We therefore have 2 lists, one of which is longer than the other, and the student has to learn to associate and match correctly. He's then confronted with options A, B, C, and D, which have marked combinations, like from list A, item number 1 mapped with item number 3 from list B. Item number 2 from list A mapped with list item number 1 from list B, and so on. So you have various combinations, and the correct option is the one which has the correct matching done entirely for both the columns. That is the task of the student, and this is a very good way of measuring how the student's ability to recognize relationships, to find, to associate between different terms, symbols, parts, processes, elements, whatever. Properties, you might like to, it could be something like, what should I say, different symptoms of an illness and different names of illnesses. So can you identify what goes with what? So this way you can match, and that helps you to associate, that helps you to form relationships between two constituents. Classification type is also another format, a variation of the simple multiple choice question. Here again, I'm talking of classification in the context of an MCQ. So here again, now you might be presented with elements which belong to a group, a class, a category, okay? And some of these, you might have several elements, one of which is not belonging to that. So you are probably asked to find out the odd one out. Or sometimes you might be given just the elements and you have to find out what principle they relate to. So you're basically doing a classification activity. Simple example from computer science, which of the following is not a web browser? So basically the student has to know the concept of a web browser. He has to know which are the different web browsers and then identify which is the odd one out. Microsoft Office is the odd one out here. Look at a question on psychology. The medical treatment of disorders like schizophrenia, paranoia, and the like is best handled by which of the following specialists? Now, here there are so many specialists given: a neurologist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a psychiatric social worker. Who is the person who is best equipped to deal with this? Now these are the different options. Some people would choose psychologists. Yes, psychologists are equipped to deal with mental illnesses like schizophrenia and paranoia, but they are not entitled to use to prescribe drugs, medicines. So it is only a medical person who can do that for mental illnesses, and that is why a psychiatrist is the correct answer. A neurologist also looks at similar problems, but he looks mostly at diseases of the nervous system, and also he is not the person dealing with behavior disorders. A psychiatric social worker is working as a team member for the treatment of and dealing with mental patients, but he is again not equipped to deal with medical treatment. So in that sense, these options are close to the correct answer, but there is only one and only correct answer. But here, what does a student do? He has to be able to classify what is a so what is the function of a psychologist? What is the function of a social worker? What is the function of a psychiatrist? Classify their functions, then choose the right function. And therefore, in this sense, it is a classification type of question. So these are basically some of the different options you have to a simple MCQ format, which you are normally accustomed to. And I would strongly recommend that we try to develop questions of these types also, because that is the way we are going to test abilities apart from mere recall of facts and information. Now, if these are the different types of MCQs, what I would also like you to look at is how do these MCQs fall under the overall scheme of evaluation of a student. A student is being tested by an MCQ, but where does that MCQ find place in his overall evaluation? And that brings us to the concept of a taxonomy of educational objectives. If you look at the syllabus of any of the courses that you are teaching, you will find that at the beginning, the syllabus is given, but there are certain objectives given. What are the objectives of that course? Then there are also certain learning outcomes, hopefully, that are specified in your syllabus. Now, what do the objectives tell you? The objectives tell you what you aim to do with these students. What is it you would like to teach them through this course? And what do the outcomes tell you? They tell you what you would expect by way of what the student can do. What is it he can he rather, when you talk of an objective, like you would like to orient the student to the basic principles in chemistry. And here, what is the objective? That is the objective. The outcome, learning outcome could be the student is able to explain. The student explains this. Okay, so this is much more accessible, more more objective in that sense. Now, when it comes to our assessment tools, our assessment has to be aligned to the objectives of the course, the teaching methodology that has been used, the instructional material that has been given, and the course outcomes. In fact, I would say your assessment, your MCQs have to actually test these learning outcomes, something that Dr. Vijay Joshi did talk about in the beginning. Now, if you talk of objectives, human beings operate in different dimensions. One is the cognitive domain, as Benjamin Bloom has pointed out. Benjamin Bloom was a very famous US educational psychologist who has given us a very important framework for a taxonomy for objectives. And this is a framework, although it was, I think, given in 1956, even today, after so many decades, we are still following the Bloom's taxonomy with a few revisions here and there by a few people. Now, Bloom talked about human beings as operating across all these domains. There is the cognitive domain, there is the affective domain, there is the psychomotor domain. Our students are also operating across all these. They think, they reason, they recall, They also have their likes, dislikes, interests, which is the affective domain. They also are doing things with their hands. They're using their muscles. They're coordinating activities. So this is the psychomotor domain. So these are the different domains. The cognitive domain, using that is the ability to use the mind, processes like knowing, thinking, understanding, memorizing, and so on. Affective domain, dealing with emotions, attitudes, and beliefs, values, likes, and dislikes. The psychomotor domain, dealing with actions of the body. Sometimes this is known as KAT, K being the knowledge, the cognitive component for knowledge, A being standing for attitudes, which is dealing with the affective domain, and KAS, sorry, and S, the third is the skill component, which is in the psychomotor domain. Now, when we talk of higher education and when we talk of our testing tools, we are normally concentrating on the cognitive domain. We hardly ever look at the affective domain. To some extent, the psychomotor domain is tested through practical components and lab work and so on. But primarily, our tests which we use, the paper and pencil tests that we use, are designed for the cognitive domain. And here we are looking at MCQs and how they are probably testing this cognitive domain. Now, how will you look at the cognitive domain? Bloom has given us a kind of a hierarchical structure of the cognitive domain. He talks of levels of functioning, cognitive functioning. One is at the knowledge level. Knowledge used, meaning the way it is used, it means information. This is primarily the information level, where you are asked to just memorize facts, remember things, remembering by rote. Mugging up is what students often do. That is basically recall of facts, recall of, for example, who is the author of a certain book, or who is the inventor for a certain invention, or who propounded a certain theory, or when was this done, or what were the major components of something. So all this is primarily just factual information. Slightly above that is the comprehension level, where the student not only knows the basic information, but is able to understand. He understands it. He is able to explain it in his own words. So if there is a concept that you have given in the books or you have explained in class, can he explain it in his own words? That is the whole aspect of comprehension, understanding. Higher than that is the concept of application. Whatever has been given in your textbooks, which you provide to the students, or whatever you have taught in class, can the student relate this to an example, to us, or to a situation which is outside the class, or what is outside what is taught in class, or outside what is given in the books? This does not mean you set questions which are beyond the syllabus. No. Very much within the syllabus, very much within the topics that have been assigned for that course, can you get the student to think of examples that are not quoted there, but directly given, but something that he can think out for himself. That is application. Analysis is something where you have a whole concept and you are supposed to be able to break it up into parts. Can you identify the components of a certain concept? Can you relate these concepts or see the relationship between two different elements in a certain compound? That is the analysis aspect. Synthesis is still higher. Synthesis is when you combine parts to make a whole. So you are composing, you're creating something, you're creating a whole out of different parts. That is a still higher level ability, which is synthesis. And even higher than that is evaluation, where the student is required to give a decision about what is good or bad about a certain thing, evaluate a certain theory based on certain merits and demerits, or, basically form a valued judgment about something. So you notice that from basic factual recall, right up to assessing something, looking at the pros and cons and coming to a conclusion about something, that is the way the scale moves. And when you look at your MCQs, what does often happen is we frame questions probably at the knowledge level, sometimes at the comprehension level, but we hardly make attempts to go to application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation, etc., which is still possible for us. But we have to make concerted efforts to do that. And that is what we need to see how we can do this. And when we look at our own students facing the final year of graduation, obviously you, I think, do not want your student to only remember mugged up information. You don't want him to only be able to explain. You want him to be able to relate it to some other new situation. You want him to develop analytical and critical abilities. You want him to develop abilities to create something. You also want him to develop judgmental capabilities. And you want to not only develop, but you also need to test these. And therefore, this is something that we need to look at when we look at MCQs in this context. How can we move higher up in this hierarchy? Let us now look at specific multiple choice questions and see how we can improve their quality, or see what are the do's and don'ts of multiple choice questions. What are the common errors we often make unintentionally? Okay, so let us look at these. One thing is you have to decide whether the item, as I told you earlier, they're referred to as items. So decide whether the item is to be the right answer or the best answer, something that I did mention earlier. This is something you need to decide in advance. Then ensure that the content covers an important testing area. It is but natural that if you're short of time and you have to submit questions, you end up submitting questions which all of which are not probably equally or very important. So you have to look at what is the important testing point in the topic that you are testing for. Are we testing needless information and therefore promoting or encouraging rote memory recall? For example, look at this question that appeared now. Most of the questions I shall now show you are questions that have appeared in the examination papers, semester end exam papers for different faculties. Here, Florence Nightingale was born on, and look at all these options. You will all agree with me, I'm sure, without a doubt, that this kind of question is something that you should do away with. Is it really important to know whether she was born on 12th May of 1920 or on 12th June of 1820 or whatever? What is more important is it an important testing point? No. What is the important testing point? What was her contribution? Why is Florence Nightingale quoted so much? Why do people swear by her? What was her contribution in the field of nursing? Avoid items requiring mere rote memorization of facts. Now here's an example from, again, nursing, nutrition and biochemistry was the paper. ICDS program was started in the year. ICDS is Integrated Child Development Services Program. Now, this is probably one of the world's largest community-based programs and is therefore very important. But whether it is, okay, the year may be important, I'm not saying it isn't, but of all the things, would you ask them to choose the year, or would you ask them to find out what the ICDS program is about and what is its significance, what is its impact, what are its merits, demerits, whatever. So get them to look at different aspects. A question on statistics, look at this. The product moment coefficient of correlation was developed by Cossack, Fisher, Pearson, Spearman. All these are undoubtedly important persons. The students must know about them, no doubt about that. But is it more important that the student understands what the Pearson's product moment correlation coefficient is, or do you really want him to only know that this was devised by Pearson? So probably a better question would be, the product moment coefficient of correlation is used to determine the degree of relationship between two dichotomous variables, a dichotomous variable and a continuous variable, two continuous variables, and a discrete and a continuous variable. So here now, you're testing his understanding of the concept of the product moment correlation coefficient. Okay, so here what I'm trying to show you is, rather than just focus on memory and recall, we are going on to at least understanding at this level. Express items as precisely and clearly as possible. We all need to be very clear. As teachers, we have to be good communicators, and whatever we are trying to assess also should be very clearly stated. We are not out to confuse the students. And for example, look at this question. In carrying out research, scientific research, the type of hypothesis which indicates the direction in which the experimenter expects the results to occur once the data has been analyzed is known as O or N. Now, I think, I may be wrong, but I think the student would probably read this question over and over again before he really understands what is the crux of the question. Maybe you could simplify it without losing out on the content of the question. A hypothesis which indicates the expected result of a study is called ON. So simplify it, be precise. Don't use simple language also is also something that you need to know. Avoid too much of wording in the questions, which is confusing to the students. Avoid jargon. Because many of our subjects do have their own jargon. Each discipline, in fact, has its own jargon. But if you are wanting jargon to understand the meaning of a certain word, yes, that is fine. But otherwise, simply stating it in a textbook kind of language, verbatim, is not really on. So try to avoid it, simplify it. For example, a question like this: a test is valid when it produces consistent scores over time, correlates well with a parallel form, measures what it purports. See, measures what it purports to measure is a standard definition of validity, picked from the textbook, has representative norms, the standard way of putting it in books. Rather than that, make it in a simpler way so that the student is not tested for his understanding of the options, but is tested for his understanding of the concept that is questioned. The validity of a test may be determined by measuring the consistency of its scores, comparing its scores with those of its parallel form, correlating its scores with a criterion measure, and evaluating the usefulness of its norms. So here you have a slightly better or an improved version of the question. Avoid questions based on opinions. I think there can be no two opinions on this matter, because finally, questions based on opinions, you can have different types of opinions. There's nothing like having a right or a wrong opinion. You are entitled to your own opinion. And in an MCQ kind of format where you're looking for one right answer, you cannot afford to have questions that are opinion based. You can definitely have such questions in subjects where opinions can be sought specially, and where the student can be asked to justify his opinions and to reason out why he holds a certain opinion, which is possible in a essay type question. Ensure that the STEM states the task or the problem completely, but without words or without unnecessary words or information. So look at this question, for example, that will make it clear. This was in history. World War II. This is an actual question that appeared in an examination. World War II was the result of the failure of the League of Nations. Horrible. Fought in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Fought during the period 39 to 45. This is the key. So what is it that the paper setter or the test designer wants? He wants the student to know the year in which the World War was fought. But tell me, if I answer that the World War II was horrible, why would you penalize me? It was horrible. You can't question that. So you can possibly have two answers which are right here. And even otherwise, this is an incomplete STEM. The STEM must identify what is the focus of the question. The focus of the question is probably expressed here. In which of these time periods was World War II fought? And you can give different kinds of dates. And some of which, don't use dates which are just out of the blue. Use dates like 1914. You could put it as 1914 to 1918 because that was the World War I. So this is the way you can have different options and get the student to identify the correct answer, but through a better framed question. Look at another example from physiology and biochemistry. Okay, general physiology. Simple diffusion. Now, what about simple diffusion? The student has to read all the options before he understands what is it that the paper setter wants to find out about simple diffusion. So, improve the STEM Make it a more complete one. Don't use incomplete statements like this. Gastrin, for example, in physiology. Gastrin, dash, dash, dash. What about gastrin? Then the student reads A, reads B, reads option C, reads option D, then knows, okay, this is what the examiner wants to know about from me about gastrin. So whatever, rather than use such kind of incomplete stems, see that your stem is complete in all respects, except for the options which will complete it, or sometimes use a direct question so that the student knows the focus and the thrust of the question. This is important. Avoid repetition in options by including common content in the stem itself. Now look at this stem. Equation of continuity in fluid dynamics expresses. Now look at the student, think of the student who's reading this question. He's reading this, then he reads the law of conservation of charge, the law of conservation of mass, the law of conservation of angular, the law of conservation of, can we redraft this question so that this law of conservation can already be included in the stem? The common content, can you include it in the stem? Look at this example again. During aerobic exercise in a normal person, heart rate increases, heart rate decreases, heart rate remains constant, heart rate fluctuates abruptly. I would get bored looking at a question like this. Why am I supposed to spend time in reading the same words repeatedly? Can I not include them in the stem? Can I not ask a simple direct question like what happens to the heart rate during aerobic exercise in a normal person? Then you're just required to write increases, decreases, remains constant, or fluctuates abruptly. So this would be a neater way you have put forth your question, and without taking undue time of the student in reading. Verify that the options are mutually exclusive and not overlapping. This is also important. That see to it that they are distinctly different, the options, that one does not merge into another. Look at this example. What should be the index of difficulty for an effective mastery model test item? Less than 10, less than 20, more than 80, more than 90. Again, somebody has scribbled something on the page.
Participants, just request you not to do any kind of scribbling. It distracts the speaker.
Where do I go? I have to look at the taskbar. Sorry. This is all over, it seems.
Ma'am, you can...
Yeah, tell me. I'm not getting that option that you're looking at. No. Some time back, I got that option where I could get that annotate and then...
Ma'am, you just have to, there is a taskbar on the top of the screen.
Yeah, but it's not now visible to me. I don't know.
Ma'am, you just click anywhere on the screen. It might appear.
It goes to the earlier next slide.
Oh, sorry.
Because this is a slide show, no? PPS.
Right.
Okay, let's see. Now it's come.
Yeah. And ma'am, there is one more option in that. You can disable other users to use annotate.
How do I do that?
Ma'am, you click on that taskbar annotation. You find annotation over there.
Yeah, I've clicked on that.
Yeah, ma'am. First of all, clear all annotation.
Okay, clear all drawings.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And ma'am, there will be also one button where it will. You can see disable other users to annotate.
That is not on this taskbar.
Okay, ma'am, you can.
Anyway, let's continue on. Yeah. All right. So we're looking at options like this. Okay. Suppose you are confronted with options like less than 10, less than 20, more than 80, more than 90. Something that is less than 10 is also less than 20. Something that is more than 90 is also more than 80. So now these are not mutually exclusive options. Rather than that, see that there is no overlap. Here's a revised version. What should be the index of difficulty for an effective mastery model test item? Less than 10, between 10 and 20, between 80 and 85, more than 90. So there is no overlap. That is something you have to take care. Ensure that all the options are plausible and relevant to the content. Sometimes what does happen is we don't have, what shall I say, options that can function as distractors. For example, look at this question. The product of two odd permutations is odd, even. Can there be a possibility beyond odd and even? Both odd and even. Would anybody look at this kind of option? None of these is again of a function, an option which will probably not be chosen even by the not well prepared student. Both are odd and even is an unlikely option, not a plausible option at all. So you're left with just two. Now, therefore, you must see to it that one thing is all options are relevant to the content of the STEM, and also that they are all possible, are all plausible options. Ensure that no irrelevant clues like language, grammar, etc. are given. Okay. Now, this is something that often happens when we are writing multiple choice questions in a hurry. We don't realize that we sometimes give away the clues or give away the right answer. Here's an example. A test which may be scored merely by counting the correct responses is an dash test. Now, remember, you're using the word "and." So when you have the word "and," you will necessarily have to have an option which has a vowel before it. So you don't use the word "and consistent test." You do say "an objective test." You don't say "and stable test." You don't say "and standardized test." So there's only one option that is fitting. And without knowing anything about the subject matter, I can write the correct answer, just purely based on the grammar here. Either you put it as /and, or you can improve the question this way. A test which may be scored by counting the correct responses is said to be consistent, objective, stable, standardized. We have used the same options here, but we have improved the STEM by not giving any clue to the student. Sometimes we also, length sometimes becomes a clue. Like you have all options and only one option is unnecessarily long, and that is the correct answer. That is the key. So we should try to make our options also relatively equal in length. Avoid obvious clues. Now, obvious clues are when the STEM itself is giving a direction as to what is the correct answer. Look at this. The disorder due to excess of thyroid hormones is called cretinism, tetany, acromegaly, thyrotoxicosis. Now, I don't know anything about this subject, but I am likely to choose D. Why? Because there is something similar between what is given in the STEM and what is there in the options. Look at another example from anatomy. The special visceral efferent component of the facial nerve arises from superior salivatory nucleus, carries taste sensation from anterior 2/3 of the tongue, supplies muscles of facial expression, carries cutaneous sensation of the skin of the auricle. Now here again, without any knowledge of the subject matter, without studying for the examination, the student might say, oh, yahan pe facial nerve likha hai, let us choose facial expression. I might be right. And this is where I am, by my own construction of the test item, promoting guessing, because the student is led to the correct answer. The key answer should also not get identified because of its specificity or its technical nature. Now look at these examples. Sometimes without realizing, we again end up writing options like this. Here's an item in physiology. The following hormones increase the level of intracellular cyclic AMP except adrenaline hormone, glucagon, parathyroid hormone, 1.25 DHCC. Now, if I was a student who had gone to the examination hall without any preparation, I look at all this and I say, this is some hormone, here's another hormone, it could not be one of these. This looks distinctly different. Maybe it's the right answer. Let me guess. And again, here I've been lucky with a guess. Look here again. Nutrition and biochemistry. 1 calorie is equal to 48 joules, 3.5 joules, 4 joules, 4.184 joules. Now, there's something very specific, something very technical about this option. I'm drawn towards it, and therefore I'm likely to choose that. as the correct answer, which it is. So again, guessing is introduced, lucky guessing for me. Eliminate irrelevant information or sources of difficulty. See, our idea is not to actually trick the student, essentially. We are not there for that. We are trying to find out what he knows. So without giving him, if you give him information that is only going to confuse him, for example, in mathematics problems, if you bombard him with a lot of numerical data, some of which is not at all relevant to what is his expected task, then we are only creating confusion in his mind, and that is not our objective. It's a different matter where in a field like management science, where you want to test how far the student has a capability to judge and to sort out what is relevant information from irrelevant information. There you might intentionally put some irrelevant stuff and get him to sort out what is irrelevant. But otherwise, in most cases, eliminate irrelevant information and sources of difficulty. Keep all options homogeneous in content. So if you're talking about properties of a certain matter, then keep all the options dealing with properties. Don't have something, if you're talking of elements, talk of all elements, don't introduce a compound somewhere else. So see that options are homogeneous in content. Place options in a logical or numerical order, either from low to high or high to low, small to big or big to small. From, if it is a question of dates, then from keep one sequence. Don't have a kind of a haphazard sequence like given here, for example, in biology. The week of intrauterine life and the formation of primordial follicles begins is the 3rd week, 7th week, 8th week, and then suddenly 1st week. Now, as a student, I might go across all this and I suddenly stop at this option. Why? Because it is not falling within a kind of a sequence. It is a little different from the rest. So I might be drawn to it. And there I am correct again. Lucky guessing. Life science. Which of the following types of DNA is a left-handed helix? A, Z, B, C. Why don't we have a kind of sequence? If it is alphabetical, why don't we have it in alphabetical order? So this is a way of putting a logical sequence to the questions. Consider using direct questions instead of weak, incomplete statements. This is something that we should look at. Very often you will come across most of the multiple choice questions in the form of incomplete statements, where there's a dash towards the end. But sometimes, in fact, very often, it is better to use direct questions so that the student is directly confronted with the task or the thrust of the question. In case of incomplete sentences, the blank should always be at the end of the stem. Look at this question in physiology. Dash dash mainly absorbs water. Now, if a student reads this, nothing is going to make sense to him. He has to read all the options, then understand that this is what the examiner wants from me. Here I want, whether it's the stomach or whether it's the small intestine or the large intestine, and I have to choose. Now, here's a very wrong use of all of these also. It's a very defective question. All of these cannot fit into the grammar of this question itself. So this is a defective question, but here I'm pointing it out from the point of view of the dash, the fill in the blank at the beginning. Try to have a stem where the latter half of it is an incomplete format. Do not use options like all of the above. This is a very strong request to you, because what happens is all of the above or none of the above. These are often used because of, I would say, some kind of difficulty we experience in formulating our own questions, especially none of the above. See what happens in a question like all, when an option like all of the above. Look at this question. This is faulty from many points of view. Bile salts. Dash dash. What about bile salts? God knows. Then you read the question, you read the options, then you know that we're talking about the functions of bile salts. Then they digest fat, they are useful in glucose absorption, they cause emulsification of fat. All of the above. Now, how does all of the above fit into this? It doesn't fit. So it is not a right format at all. If you want to include a question where more than one option is correct, then if you recall, I explained to you the multiple selection type of format, where you can have different options and different statements, And then finally the options could be A and B, A and C, C and D, B and C, or A, B, C and D. That way you can have that question rather than have all of the above. None of the above should be used very rarely and appropriately. It should fit in grammatically also, sometimes it doesn't fit. And none of the above, as I was just mentioning, sometimes it shows a dearth of our own capacities, that we don't know what, you have exhausted all your options and you don't know anything what you should put as a fourth option, and you have to put 4 options in the MCQ format that you've been asked to, so you write none of the above. But if it is not applicable at all, it is going to be what is known as a non-functioning distractor. It does not perform the function of distracting the ill-prepared student. So don't use, to the extent possible, none of the above. Use it if at all rarely. If it is used rarely, use it appropriately where it fits into the grammar of the question. Sorry. And if it is used in a question paper, suppose you have some 40-item question paper and 2 or 3 of your items have none of the above, see to it that somewhere at least that none of the above is the right answer. Then it can perform as an effective distractor. Try to make items positively worded. Avoid negatively worded questions. Avoid negative words to the extent possible. And if at all you're using them, see to it that they are emphasized. Why? Because you want the student, he's in a rush, facing a time constraint. You don't want him to miss out the knot. So you make it in bold or capital or underline, whatever it is, so that you emphasize not the negative word. And this is the way you would put it. Which of the following is not an example of? Okay. Ensure that the item is not biased towards or offensive to any culture or religious group. There can be no 2 opinions about this. And this normally does not happen in the sciences. It can happen in the social sciences. It can sometimes happen in the languages and literature also. So we have to guard against this kind of item, which can be later on criticized as being offensive to any religious or cultural group. Verify that items are not dependent on other items in the test. Sometimes we introduce questions where the option itself given for that question becomes an answer to another question. Like, for example, if you're giving the authors of a certain book, like I was talking to the other group in the morning. Suppose you're talking of David Copperfield, written by Charles Dickens, but then you want to know the author, you want the student to identify. Okay, then you ask the author of David Copperfield was, and you give different options like Somerset Maugham, you can give Dickens, and of course you will give, say, Woodhouse, P.G. Woodhouse, or Jane Austen, whoever. Okay, now this is one question, for example, in the question paper. Somewhere else you might have a question like Dickens, David Copperfield does this, or the main thrust of this is like this. Now here you've already given the answer. So the student didn't know it the first time when he saw that question, but when we went ahead in the test, he found the answer already. So you have to be very sure that this doesn't happen. And I must tell you that when in the university that I was working in, I have often come across this. The question paper is ready to go to the press, and there you come across certain things that, oh, the paper setter has by mistake already given the clue to the answer. Then again, you've got to get hold of the question paper setter, try to get him to give another optional question. All such things happen. And I'm sure the controller of examinations in every university is also faced with such situations. In a test, ensure that the keyed answer is randomized. This is also important. Some of us operate with a mental set. Like when I'm framing questions, suppose I have a tendency to mark C as my correct answer. And then in my question paper, I have more C's as the key. And the student who is not very well prepared finds a number of C's that are right. And the questions that he doesn't know the answer to, he might just guess it, mark it as C, only with the hope that, okay, there are more C's as the right answers in this question paper. So we have to avoid that kind of situation. See that the answer key is well balanced. or randomized, so that you don't have a situation where you promote guessing of the answer by a not well prepared student. So these are some of the rather major number of do's and don'ts that you have to take into account when you are preparing multiple choice questions. But suppose you are today in a situation where you have already prepared a large number of questions because you are fighting against a tight
Ma'am, are you there?
मॅडम आपण आपला माईक अनम्यूट करा. मॅडम आपला माईक म्यूट आहे, तो अनम्यूट करा मॅडम. हा मॅडम बोला आता. आपण
आत्ताच झाला का अनम्यूट?
हो, 1 मिनिट झाला मॅडम, 1 मिनिट झाला.
Okay. So I'll just repeat. Does the item measure important mental ability? Is the content of the item important or trivial? Am I really testing an important testing point, or am I just testing because I had to complete the number of questions that I was required to in the question paper? Are the educational objective and the difficulty level of the item correctly stated? Now, this is
Share your screen, ma'am.
Ma'am, your PPT is not visible.
PPT is not seen?
No, ma'am.
You have to share your screen again, ma'am.
Yes, oh God. What has happened? Oh. I'll have to exit this to share my screen, I think. Okay, let me see.
Ma'am, just click on share screen button.
Yeah, but this is not available over here now.
Ma'am, just a minute. I will just for a second, I will remove you as a co-host and I'll reassign you as a co-host.
Pardon?
मॅडम तो तुम्हाला को होस्ट करतोय, मग तुम्हाला ते शेअर स्क्रीनचं बटन दिसेल बहुतेक.
Ma'am, you are already co-host, ma'am.
Yeah, I am a co-host. I think I'll have to exit this.
गरज नाही मॅडम, तुम्ही पार्टिसिपंट चॅट त्याच्या बाजूला शेअर स्क्रीन आहे बघा मॅडम.
No, it is not available here somehow. I don't know.
Ma'am, if you can quickly re-log in, I guess it will be back.
Yeah, I think that is better. Let me just try.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. So please bear with us. I think she is going to log in again, and then we can start her presentation.
Just log in. So,
Thank you. Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you see the PPT?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay. Sorry, I'm very sorry. I don't know what went wrong, but it's taken up some time anyway. Okay, so we were on the checklist. Coming back to it. Let me just close this now. Now, is the answer likely to be correctly identified by approximately half the number of students? Now, generally, when we talk of difficulty level, normally, if a question that is answered by, say, about 50% of the students is generally considered to be a good question, because it divides the students in terms of those who are well prepared from those who are not well prepared. That is being statistically found. I think I was on the earlier point. Are the educational objective and the difficulty level of the item correctly stated? Now, this is also very, very important, because along with every question that you submit for the question bank, you should not only submit the question and the answer key, you should also submit how much what or educational objective is being reached. Is it at the knowledge level? Is it at the comprehension level? Is it at analysis level? Whatever. What is its difficulty level? Your estimate of how difficult that item will be seen as by the students. In addition, you should also be able to write out the estimated time for answering that question. If it is a complex problem, a question with a passage, a comprehension passage, for example, then obviously the reading time is going to be more. If it's a mathematical problem, the calculation time is going to be more. Therefore, accompanying the question, you should also specify how much time is going to be required by the question. Can the answer be guessed by a student who knows nothing about the subject? This is another point you have to look at in your checklist. Then again, are the language, data, arithmetical operations, etc., given in the item conveyed in a simple, easy to understand form? Ask yourself all these questions and see whether the answer that you get objectively is something which requires you to modify your question. Is the item biased towards any particular group? Is there excess verbiage, data, etc., that is likely to confuse or mislead the student? The idea is not to trick a student. The idea is not to catch him unawares. The idea is to find out how much he knows. So as a whole, if you look at the question or the item, these are some of the questions you should answer. Now look at the stem. The stem, does it state the task completely without unnecessary words? Is it worded clearly and concisely? Are the negative words, if at all used, properly emphasized? These are important aspects that you must ask yourself. Check the options. Even though you have written your questions and you're probably at a time where you would like to submit the questions for your whoever the authorities you have to submit to, check whether there are certain repeated options, words in the options, which can be again rephrased and rewritten so that they can be included in the stem. Are the differences between the options clear? Are they very distinctly different, the options? Or do they merge with each other? Or there can be two answers, whatever. Are all the options mutually exclusive? This is something that I talked about earlier. Where relevant, are the options arranged, expressed in a logical order, like alphabetical, numerical, etc.? This is something that we talked about. So these are some of the questions you ask yourself. Check the keyed answer. Now, are you convinced that the key is correctly marked? And is it unequivocally the correct or the best answer? The best way to do this, I would say, is look at your question, discuss it with a subject expert, and check whether he independently arrives at the same key. I was telling the group in the morning my experience with while doing editing of questions. And as I said, I've looked at a wide variety of disciplines. And I found that even in a subject like computer science, where the correct answer should be pretty easy and unequivocally the correct answer, here too experts differed in terms of what should be the key, which means not that the experts are wrong. The fact is that the question needs modification. It needs to be improved in a way that the key is unequivocally the correct and the best answer. Can it be improved in clarity or correctness? Look at the distractors. Are any of the distractors as completely correct as the key? So that maybe a good student also can be led to the another option, which could as well be considered as the key. Can that land into a major problem for you in the university setup where there are more than one correct answer? Do all the distractors appear plausible without being the correct answer? Now, this is also important. Although there should be only one correct answer, I did mention to you that all the options should be near the correct answer. They should be plausible so that the ill-prepared student can be probably attracted to the wrong answer. Do any distractors use words which make them obviously wrong so that the student is hardly likely to be picked up by student? So that these are non-functioning distractors. Are we using such kinds of options which can never be picked up by students? This is something that you need to look at. So you look at the question as a whole, you look at the stem, you look at the options, you look at the key, you look at the distractors. This is the way you review your questions, ask yourself these questions and see whether your questions which you have already prepared need modification. Now let us look at some of the commonly asked questions, the questions that arise in your minds or when you're discussing the MCQ format with others. You often come across certain criticism and certain questions that are asked. So is it easier to score on MCQs as compared to other question formats? In a way, yes. Why? Because of the kind of MCQs we have included mostly in our question papers. By itself, the MCQ is not necessarily easier to score. If it involves reasoning, thinking, critical thinking, analysis, and so on. But yes, if you look at MCQs, the way they are normally found in question papers, they do tend to be more easily scored, or rather easier to score, yes, but more higher scores you can get. Sorry, I made a mistake. It is easier to score, yes, as compared to other question formats because it is objective. There's a right answer, wrong answer. So definitely it is easier to score. Can one increase one's score by guessing? To some extent, yes. But can one decrease the amount of guessing? That is also possible, either by increasing the number of options or by increasing the length of the test or by making your options so close to the correct answer, though there is only one correct answer, so you reduce the chances of guessing. Are there greater chances of cheating by students on MCQs? I would say yes, if you use the same question paper for a large number of students in one examination hall? Yes, because then the students can easily exchange in their own non-verbal ways what is the right answer to a certain question. But there are ways of dealing with this. For example, you can have multiple versions of a certain question paper and distribute them in a way that people, the student in front of me, behind me, to my left and to my right, receive different versions. That is possible. So that even if you use the same items but have them in a different sequence in the question paper, the student can't say, "Arey, answer, 3 number question ka answer kya hai?" He will not discuss that. He will not exchange information like this. So you can reduce the element of cheating. And of course, you can have multiple versions of question papers. And that is possible through a machine kind of setup, a technology setup, basically. I'd like to share with you that even in my own university, I was looking at a program for the students of the Indian Army. There too, I did a total online MCQ type of question paper for an undergraduate program for far out students, right up to Ladakh. And I was able to create the kind of a test, an examination where we could have multiple versions of the same question paper, which were equal, educationally equivalent. So this is possible. That can eliminate the possibility of cheating. How many options should a multiple choice item have? Research has shown, they have tried out what is the reliability level with 2 options, 3 options, 4 options, 5 options, and so on. But by and large, research has shown that generally a 4-option kind of multiple choice format gives a highly reliable kind of test result. What is the optimum time required for answering an MCQ? This is a slightly tricky question, because the optimum time will be dependent on the kind of question that you are using.
Then please mute yourself.
Yeah. So optimum time will depend on the nature of the questions that you have used. Suppose it is a question of pure recall, like who is the author of a certain book. Then there is the student can answer it in a few seconds, 30 seconds or so. But if the question is something that requires reading time, more reading time, or some complex processes, requires critical thinking, then obviously the time required is more. But by and large, there has been research done on the average time required per item based on the discipline studied. And they have generally found out that for disciplines in the arts side or in education, like say economics or history, philosophy, political science, psychology, sociology, and so on, the average time per question is about 54 seconds, they have found out, per question. For the languages, though, they have done this kind of research more for the foreign languages, of course, English literature also. Here they have found that the average time is about 52 seconds. So it is more or less the same. But for science, mainly if they've studied physics, chemistry, mathematics, even computer science, engineering, geology, they've studied subjects like this. And they have found that the variation is from something like, I would say 49 seconds to about 1 minute 7 seconds. So sorry, 1 minute 55 seconds. So this is now a big range, which means that you can have questions carrying more, requiring more time. You can have questions having less time. But by and large, I would say that for the sciences, about more than a minute and a half, nearly 1.7 minutes would be an average time for the questions. Of course, that would depend on how many such questions you have in your question paper. What is your total length of test? These are decisions that will be taken at your own level by your own faculties, by your own deans, and so on. Is it possible to develop MCQs for all courses and disciplines? I've already given you examples of various disciplines where it is possible to develop MCQs. Yes, it is possible to develop MCQs. There are certain restrictions about how much you can test. But yes, all courses and disciplines, especially When you are looking at cognitive skills, it is possible, and we have seen, and I shall show you some more examples of how you can test higher order questions using MCQs. Can we test higher mental abilities? Yes, definitely. We'll see how. Let me give you some examples of certain disciplines where MCQs are used, like in mathematics here. The slope of the straight line with two connecting points is determined by, when there are options here in terms of 1 point, 2 point, 0 point formulae. Biology, again, you have an example here. Dissolved substance, sugar, mineral salts, amino acids are the contents of all options here. Again, look at this question in physics. This is slightly at a higher level as compared to the other questions. When a charged particle moves at right angle to a magnetic field, the quantity that changes is momentum, speed, energy, and moment of inertia. Now, rather than asking a student what is meant by momentum, or what is the definition of, what is the correct definition of moment of inertia, rather than a simple recall kind of question, here is a question that they're saying, suppose there's a charged particle which moves at right angles to a magnetic field. The change that occurs could be looked at as this. So you are making the student think a little bit before he answers. Look at financial. People in commerce often feel that it's not, is it possible to ask questions of the MCQ type in the field of commerce, a subject like financial management? Here's a question which I think is a well-worded question. The primary goal of financial management is to maximize the return, minimize the risk, maximize the wealth of owners, maximize profit. Now, all of these look like plausible options. One of them is, of course, the correct answer, but the other options are also effective distractors. And rather than have a student write a 5 marks answer on what is the goal of financial management and to clarify that, here is the crux of the whole thing. The goal is spelled out and the student has to choose the right answer. Engineering drawing, another subject which is often, of course, it requires a lot of drawing, graphs and things like that. But you can also, within limitations, there are limitations to some extent, but you can always have those graphs as part of your stem of the question and then ask the student to choose the right answer. Architectural drafters generally prefer to use dash drawings to help illustrate three-dimensional views of a structure: isometric, perspective, orthographic, auxiliary. Here's a question in accountancy now. Accountancy, again, there is a misbelief that it is not possible to have MCQs. We have, in fact, I have come across for accountancy papers, no, we require to prepare balance sheets, ask the student to prepare balance sheets, and then it becomes a long question and it should carry many more marks. True, all agreed. That is probably the requirement of your discipline. Yet, is it not possible, absolutely not possible, to break up something into smaller components and test those smaller components through discrete questions? Here's an example. Bills receivable appear in a company's balance sheet under the subhead current investments, cash equivalents, trade receivables, short-term loans and advances. So here are some examples of how we have actually used these MCQ type of questions for, here example in like in different disciplines, like say management, strategic management. The BCG matrix is based on industry. Now this is a well-worded question again, where it requires the student to think a little bit. Not just what is the BCG matrix, simple question like that, but it is based on, and there are different combinations given. Industry attractiveness and business strength, industry growth rate and business strength, industry attractiveness and relative market share, industry growth rate. So there are just two things, but they are used in different combinations. And the student has to select the correct answer. English again. Now there is a lot of feeling among people who teach the languages and literature that MCQs is not an appropriate form of questioning for those subjects. But MCQs, despite their limitations, can still be used to test language skills. Here's an example. Identify the correct meaning of the underlined phrase. The authorities took him to task for his negligence. Rather than ask him to explain what is the meaning of this phrase, here is a nice way of putting it. What does it mean? Gave him additional work. suspended his assignment, reprimanded him, or forced him to resign for his negligence. Yes, of course, it is reprimanded him, but here this is a way of testing the student's understanding of phrases. You can use idioms also. Ask the student, give him different options based on idioms. Okay, so now can we move on to how we can test higher mental abilities? Of course, along my discussion, I've all along told you how we can move to higher testing, higher abilities, but I want to give you some specific examples. MCQs can certainly be...
Excuse me, ma'am. Just before you go ahead, just wanted to know, ma'am, how will a mathematics teacher be able to, suppose if you want to check out some equations and check the ability of the mathematical skill of the student, will that be possible as MCQs?
Yes. Numerical tests are definitely possible. You can give options. You can give a mathematical problem, give the problem, and then give options based on that. The only thing that will happen is you will give some place for rough work if the student is required to do some kind of calculations, or if he's expected to do mental calculations, yes, he can do that, and then there are options that are possible.
Because it is not, feasible to put in an equation or type out some mathematical expression, say slope equation and all that. So just wondering how that would,
very
translate as
very definitely possible. In fact, there are a number of examples in mathematics, equations, derivatives, all of this, which you can use through the MCQ format. Not difficult at all.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. So higher mental abilities like application, analysis, synthesis can also be tested by using a context, like a table, a graph. For example, in mathematics, you might have some graphical depictions. You might want the student to interpret certain graphical graphs. In management, you might want to say how a company has performed over the last some quarters. Then you might show it graphically. You might ask the student to interpret the graphs. You can use a picture, you can use a screenshot. In the field of computer science, for example, in programming also, you can give them screenshots. And since you're using an online technology platform, you can use these screenshots as your stimulus material and ask the student to respond based on that. You can even show a video if required. In English, you can show a video of people conversing. You can probably ask for the correct pronunciations of a word or whatever. Okay, simulation or a scenario. Sometimes you can give a context like a table, or sometimes you give a scenario like a passage or a narration or a case study. In management also, we often have these case studies. So you want to study judgmental skills, you want to test managerial skills, strategic skills, so planning skills. So all that can be tested through a case study. Now here's an example in English, which is a higher order question. Again, somebody has done some kind of scratching now. Okay, so select the pair which has the same relationship for the following. Okay, now look at this question. Pain is to sedative, and there are options. Comfort is to stimulant, grief is to consolation, trance is to narcotic, ache is to extraction. Now, it is not just understanding what is the meaning of a sedative. It is what is the relationship between these two. A sedative will help to alleviate or remove pain. So there is a function that the sedative is performing to remove this problem. So now this is what the student has to analyze. And then he relates, okay, this is comfort is to stimulant, no. Narcotic cannot reduce or eliminate trance, no. Extraction cannot remove pain, it will probably give you pain. Consolation, yes, it can alleviate grief. So this is probably the right answer. So here you have a test of analogies, basically, verbal reasoning, which is tested through an MCQ kind of format. Again, in literature, you can give extracts from some drama, some poetry, and then some classics. And then you ask questions based on this. For example, you can ask questions like functions of the words and use them from the paragraph or the poetry, whatever is primarily to, and give options which make the student think. Or which of the following statements best conveys something? Or which of the following can be reasonably inferred from? You're wanting the student to understand the implicit meaning of some poem. So what can be inferred? What is the message the poet is trying to give? All this can be tested again through the MCQ format. Now look here. We are trying, I've given you an example of an item which is originally given at a slightly lower level of mental ability, and it has now been flipped to test a slightly higher function. This is, which of the following best describes what is meant by formative assessment? Simple question. Anybody who knows what is formative assessment will choose probably option D here. It is based on the student's attitudes, interests, and values. No. It is designed primarily to evaluate learning. It is usually high stakes. It provides information to provide teaching and learning, because that is the constructive role that formative assessment plays. Now, instead of asking a direct question like what is meant by formative assessment, why not use it in an application form? A teacher uses a strategy called thumbs up and thumbs down, especially in these lower classes in school. You often have teachers giving thumbs up, thumbs down, smileys, smileys pointing downwards, smileys upwards, and so on. That is all symbolic too for the students. This illustrates the use of affective assessment, formative assessment, diagnostic assessment, summative assessment. So you've used a situation. You have flipped this item from the original, made it a little application based. Let us look at some other example. Here's an example from nursing. A simple example here. Which of the following assessment findings, look at this column, is characteristic of a patient with Parkinson's disease? Now, all of us know what happens to a person suffering from Parkinson's disease. Okay, he has a shuffling gait. He's unable to have coordinated movements. Now, night blindness, pain in lower extremities, shuffling gait, incontinence. Okay, the answer is obviously shuffling gait, pretty easy. Now, can we make this a question which has some kind of a passage to it or some kind of a scenario to it? Here's a scenario-based question. A nurse is making a home visit to a 75-year-old male who has had Parkinson's disease for the past 5 years. Which of the following has the greatest implication for this patient's care? Okay, now this nurse, what is it that the nurse needs to give most importance to? One is the patient's wife tells the nurse that the grandchildren have not visited for over a month. Is it important for the nurse? No. The nurse notes that there are numerous throw rugs throughout the patient's home. Is it important? Yes, definitely, because with a kind of shuffling gait that the patient has, he's likely to trip, he's likely to fall, he's likely to hurt himself. So when there are throw rugs thrown around the house, yes, that is important. This is something that is of consequence for the nurse. The patient has a towel wrapped around his neck that the wife uses to wipe her husband's face. The patient is sitting in an armchair and the nurse notes that he's gripping the arms of the chair. See, a question like this has intrinsic interest value also. You find it interesting to read something like this rather than getting bored with simple factual information. And again, you are challenging the student to think, to apply what he has learned to a new situation, which is not strictly given in his textbook or which is not strictly taught to him in class. This is what is important here. Now look at this question, which is in physics. This is, I'm not giving you a flipped item, I'm giving you an example of how you can use diagrams for getting students to think and answer questions in the multiple choice format. In the diagram below, parallel light rays pass through a convex lens and converge to a focus. They can be made parallel again by placing and what are the options? Concave lens at point B, concave lens at point C, second convex lens at point A, and second convex lens at point C. Now the student will need to know the light, the concept of light, how light travels. You will have to know the concept of convex lens, concave lens. You will have to know how the focal point is reached. And he will have to understand the concept of refraction also. All these things are all tested through just a simple diagram. And you can create an image. You have an image file along with your multiple choice format and give the answers. You can have so many questions based on images. You can have so many questions based on graphs. on sketches. In biology, you can have sketches given. You can have options in the sketches also. So there are I think the sky is the limit to where you can go with your MCQs. It is how innovative you can be, how creative you can be, how much you would like to challenge yourself as a teacher, and how much you would like to look at it not as a constraint, but as an opportunity. To conclude, I would say writing good quality MCQs is a skill. Undoubtedly, it is a skill. But it is a skill that can be acquired. It's not an inborn skill. All of us, through practice, through training, can improve upon our own skill. Nobody is perfect. Even if I have spent years on on editing questions, I'm not infallible. I can still create defective MCQs, which can be improved upon by people like you. So the important point is for us to realize that this is a skill which is an ongoing process, a skill which can be improved upon, and a skill for which we have to be academically open to improvement. Despite all the controversy that surrounds the use of MCQs, they still remain a preferred question format. For many evaluation experts, this is undoubtedly the case. Whether we like it or not, today MCQs have gained more and more acceptance among experts, and the kind of innovative ways of testing using MCQs that have been designed of late, these really make it a very preferred kind of question format. And now this is a very crucial point I have always liked to make. There, among the different processes in education, teaching, learning, and evaluation unfortunately has remained over the years the weakest link. It has been the link that has resisted long-term reform for a long time, for decades. The UGC has come up with its minimum examination reforms, recommendations. There are so many bodies, there are so many commissions, so many committees that have been formulated, which have been talking about the importance of evaluation and the importance of a scientific approach. But we have always paid less attention to this. That is the unfortunate reality. And we as teachers often like to teach. We like to probably read up. We like to teach. We like to engage in class discussions. But when it comes to setting question papers, evaluating students, that is something we like to be away from. That is what is happening. That is the reality. But while this is the case, isn't it really paradoxical that something that we have paid the least attention to is that point which is the most important from the point of view of the students? Their future career depends on that final grade, that stamp of excellence or poor performance that he gets, which is going to determine his future. And therefore, I would always urge you to look at it as a very important task for us. Writing of MCQs is a responsibility which we need to take very seriously, with a commitment that yes, it is possible and we can do it and we shall do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, madam.
Ma'am, now we'll keep the session open for a few questions.
Sure.
Yeah. Please put your questions in the chat box. Ma'am, one question I was seeing, somebody was asking, is there any tool for generating MCQs?
There is something called especially for mathematical things, there's something like item generators they have. Some way from one question where they change the values, change certain formula, and you can create more questions. But that is again a kind of a software tool that is available.
Okay.
Or you can also use it for grammar, English grammar, language, whatever language you're teaching. You do have some, but these are facilitators. Normally they test you at the same difficulty level or the same objective. The generator only gives multiple questions of that.
Anybody else has a question?
I think somebody has raised a hand. Apte madam, can she ask the question? Please unmute yourself. Should one strictly avoid negatively framed question, madam?
I won't say you should reduce that number. I won't say totally have no negatively worded, because sometimes when you have to find a question with an odd one out, so which of it doesn't fit, which of the following don't fit into this concept, or which element does not fall into this, or which property does not conform to a certain principle. So all that, then you have to have the not kind of question. So I won't say eliminate the negatively worded questions, reduce them in number, and when used, see that you emphasize them.
Vishakha Apte madam, can you just type the question in a chat box? Because it will be very difficult to search you in 400 people. Vishakha Apte madam want to writing a question, please.
Yeah, meanwhile, Manoj Sangare, you can ask a question.
Yeah. Hello, madam. Don't you think that if colleges adopt this Bloom's taxonomy factors to evaluate students' understanding, so that may affect colleges' result?
See, now one thing is, as I mentioned earlier, we look at it very academically. You have a course that you are teaching. The course has certain objectives. You begin with that, okay? For those objectives to be materialized, there's some content that is given through the books. There is some teaching that you do through your teaching methodology. And there is an expected outcome, learning outcome. Now, if that is the curriculum that you have to deal with, is it not your task to see to it that those learning outcomes are properly assessed? Now, if the course objective is something like the student should be, or rather the learning outcome should be something like the student should be is able to explain something, or is able to recall something, or is able to define some terms, yes, then your Bloom's taxonomy, where the questions could be limited to the lower level questions. And of course, then your college results will not be very bad. But if the course objective requires that the student does critical thinking, that the student is required to compare two different points of view, then it is our task to see that we actually test them on this. And then you have to use the higher levels in Bloom's taxonomy, regardless of whether the results are poor or not.
I will respond to this question like this: whether we are testing the ability of a child or you want to improve your college result. So I think you cannot have an either or, right? So the evaluation is meant for finding out the learning outcome and not improving the college result. So it is better to have a mix of the question which generally been professed by the experts.
Ma'am, there's another question. How do you differentiate between say a easy question and a difficult question? What should be the criteria to determine, say, between a 1 mark and a 2 mark or a 4 mark question?
Actually, who is the best judge? It is the teacher. The teacher is the one who is teaching the students. The teacher, when he or she is teaching, is aware that this kind of concept is more difficult for the students. They find it more difficult to understand as compared to something else. So when they frame a question, it is their estimate, their judgment. They think that, okay, this question will probably be found easy by the student. What is easy? Easy means the student is able to answer it correctly. If this question is something that is that is a complex concept, which most of the students normally do not understand, and you frame a question on it, yes, it is difficult. That is the way you label it as difficult or easy. In fact, you can think of a scale like very easy, easy, moderate or average, difficult, and very difficult. And you look at it in terms of percentages. Suppose your question can be answered by only, say, about 20% of the students, according to your estimate, then it is really a very difficult question. If it is, say, can be answered between, say, the next about 30%. Pardon?
Okay. No, ma'am, somebody else was. Okay.
Yeah. If it can be answered by 80% of the students, yes, it is a very easy question. If it can be answered by only, say, 60% of the students, maybe it is something that is within the average range. So you have to, it is your judgment of how difficult you think the students will perceive that question. And I would like to go a step ahead when I say this. What does happen, and in our question banking techniques, we do come across something like item analysis. After a question has been used in a question paper, there are ways by which you can statistically analyze how the students have responded to that question. So even if you feel that that question was very difficult and you feel that only about 20% of the students would be able to answer it in your estimate, suppose the actual results show that, say, 50% of the students have answered it correctly. Now your perception and the reality has undergone a change. So then you will need to modify that difficulty level of that question. But that is a later exercise once you do that kind of post-validation exercise or item analysis.
Ma'am, you can give any examples of, just now you were mentioning about the mathematical type of questions where how people should set that, say, based on mathematical equations or...
Actually, when you have, that's not my field, but I would say, can you not, in your STEM, write out a detailed problem, which otherwise you would ask in a short answer question maybe, write it out and you give options for the correct answer, or you give options about what should be the process to be adopted, what should be the computation to be done, may not be the actual computation, what should be the steps taken, and you give a sequence of steps. This should be done first, next, later, and so on. You give options about sequence. There again, you are testing his ability to process that information given in the mathematical problem and use his reasoning as to what he should do to arrive at the correct answer. So there are definitely there's scope for that. Mathematics, I don't see any problem in designing test items involving reasoning, problem solving, and so on.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much. I think, sir, that's enough with our question answer session today. Ma'am, it's been a wonderful presentation, madam, which has steered us very smoothly through this new system of learner evaluation. You were able to resolve effectively many of the apprehensions and anxieties the participants had while embarking on the new technology. We are so grateful to you for your deep involvement and support throughout this long session. As we come to the end of this very informative session, I would welcome Sri Padmakar Mane, Vice Principal of Ramanand Arya D.A.V. College, to propose a vote of thanks and conclude the event. Before I hand it over to him, I would request all the participants to please note that the feedback links will be sent to the individual WhatsApp groups. Kindly fill them before the end of the session. Mane sir, over to you.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, friends. On behalf of Ramanand Arya D.A.V. College, I convey our grateful thanks to RUSA, Government of Maharashtra, for joining with us in hosting this webinar. Our special thanks to Dr. Vijay Joshi, Chief Consultant to RUSA, who chaired today's webinar and also shared his very valuable observations relating to the theme of today. We also thank you, sir, for giving us the opportunity to join RUSA in putting up this event for the benefit of all the faculty members. It is our good fortune that a person of Dr. Anuradha Deshmukh's caliber accepted our invitation and performed the role of the resource person at this webinar. We have all been immensely benefited by your well articulated presentation and down to earth explanations. Madam, on behalf of all the attendees of this webinar and on behalf of Ramananda Arya D.A.V. College, I extend our sincere thanks for giving us the right directions. My special thanks to Dr. Pramod Pabrekar sir, Senior Consultant to RUSA, for his cooperation and assistance provided in holding this webinar in a very successful manner. I would also like to place on record our deep appreciation for the interest taken by all the faculty members from various colleges in participating in this webinar in large numbers. My special thanks to our IT support team for conducting this webinar without any glitches. I conclude this vote of thanks with my best wishes for a safe and healthy future to all of you and your near and dear ones. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Special thanks to Principal Bhamre sir.
Yes, Bhamre sir, thank you. Mane
you,
sir,
sir.
thank you. Thank you for taking this pain to organize this one. And Anuradha madam, as usual, lucid, clear, and simple.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, everybody.
Entire team, entire DAV team, I think they have worked very hard.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It
you.
is not only Mane sir or I
Yes, sir.
think Ganguly madam and all other team, Mayur.
Yes, sir.
I
They
think
have taken lots of
a
pain.
lot of pain. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
We should conclude, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.